everybody. We are focusing on a approach to jazz improvisation with this lesson. We're going to just get our feet wet, talking about how to begin to improvise over harmonic changes. So with this lesson, we're going to be focusing on Autumn Leaves, which is one of the most standard of jazz standards out there. But the process that we're going to take and the techniques that we're going to outline throughout this lesson could be applied to any number of jazz standards. So this is assuming that you know the melody of the tune. Obviously, that's the first thing you need to learn. You need to familiarize yourself with the melody, listening to recordings, more so than looking at lead sheet. Lead sheets are great. We're going to use them throughout this lesson as well, but you should be definitely listening to recordings and getting the tune in your ear, and more importantly for this lesson, getting the harmonic changes in your ear. So this is assuming you know the melody of the tune. Another really great beginning improvisation technique is ornamenting or altering the melody of the tune in some way. We're going to take a different approach. Perhaps that's a different lesson than for today. But so as far as improvising over the harmonic changes, the first thing you need to know is the chord changes for the tune. Here you see the chord changes for this tune. We are going to do this tune in the key of G minor, which it often is done. And you see here a lot of the type of chord changes that you see in many jazz standards. Lots of 2-5-1, lots of circle of fifths type root movement throughout this tune. So like I said, G minor, the first thing you see there is a 2-5-1 in the relative major of B flat in this case. So you have C minor 7, F7, B flat major. So a 2-5-1-4 in the relative major. And then we have our 2-5-1 in the home key of G minor. So you see how these chords kind of function. A minor 7 flat 5 would be the 2 of G. D7 would be the 5, and then to our tonic chord of G minor. So that's the first thing you need to know. You have to have these harmonic changes in your head. So as some preliminary exercises to sort of get ourselves accustomed to hearing these changes and playing them on our instrument, we're going to do several exercises just dealing with the chord tones of each one of those chords and playing them in real time. So this first exercise is straight out of a Jamie Aebersold book, which some of you may have studied a little bit, but then we're going to take it kind of in a different direction and do a few extra things with it. So we're just simply going to outline each one of those 4-note chords. We're not going to do any extensions, anything like that. We're just dealing with root, 3rd, 5th, 7th of each chord. And we're just going to outline them in real time over the changes of the tune. So it's just going to be in this way: 1, 2, 3, 4. And so on and so on. So you see what I'm doing. I'm taking 1, 2, 3, 4. Each bar I'm playing right on the downbeat, those 4 notes with this rhythm. Do ba do ba, do ba do ba, do ba do ba. So that's the first exercise, just to get ourselves accustomed to hearing and playing the chord tones that's involved with each one of these chords. So let's take a listen to that. let's take that same exercise and just flip it around a little bit to get ourselves a little bit more comfortable. Rather than focusing on the root of each chord, we're going to start with each one of those arpeggios. We're going to start from the top and work our way down. So instead of, it's going to be, so we're just starting from the top of the chord, which is the 7th of the chord, and we're going 7th, 5th, 3rd, root. Next chord, next chord, next one, next. And so on and so on. All right, so this may take some time. This may trip you up at first, and that's okay. You'll have to really practice this. You might need to practice it slowly at first, but make sure that you can play it in time for the entire tune, playing every single chord change throughout the entire song in time, preferably with a metronome. Quick word about practicing with a metronome in this style. What I think is really helpful is to put the metronome on half the speed that you're going and think of it as being on 2 and 4. So if I took my metronome here, I have my metronome on my phone, like I'm sure many of you do as well. Let's say I wanted to practice a tune at 120. I'll put my metronome on 60, and then I would feel that beat as 2 and 4. So I'd feel that as 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, and then play my exercise. And so on and so on. I think that's really helpful, and it gets you to start to feel the swing, feel the groove of this music. More about that later. Okay, so here's an example of the first exercise, but the opposite way. So next, we're going to do this 2 more different kind of inversions of this exercise. So now, rather than doing root position chords on each one of these, we're going to do 4/3 inversions, or second inversion 7th chords. So in the case of the first chord, what was this? Becomes, so we're playing what ends up being 5th, 7th, root, 3rd. And so on and so on. All right, so once you play this, you're kind of comfortable with where the 5th of each chord is. All right, so here's an example of that. Now, finally, you're going to take the same exercise, same inversion you just did, but you're going to start from the top of the inversion and come down. So now instead of, you're going to start. You see what I'm saying? And so on and so on. And by now, if you're really practicing these and getting them down, you should be really hearing these chord changes, and you should be able to hear where the chords are going. So, here's an example of that. So once you've done all of this, you should be fairly comfortable with all the different scale degrees of all the different chords. And we're just dealing with chord tones here. So the first version of that exercise, you're starting on the root of each chord. Second version of that exercise, you're starting on the 7th of each chord. And so on and so on. The third version of that exercise with the second inversion, you're starting on the 5th of each chord. And then the fourth version of that exercise, you're starting on the 3rd of each chord. So, once you've done all that, in time, shoot for around 120, something like that. You should be feeling fairly comfortable with all the chord tones on all those chords throughout the entire tune, and you should have the chord changes memorized, internalized, and be ready to start to improvise. Memorized, internalized, ready to start improvise. I like that. So at this point, I would take a little time and experiment. Kind of get your feet wet, trying to construct a solo, trying to play a solo at a slow tempo, using only chord tones, using only the appropriate chord tones throughout the tune. All right, so let me just demonstrate a little bit here. A solo using only chord tones. Now this isn't something you really would do in real life, like on a gig or whatever, but it's a very, very useful exercise to get started improvising. So from the beginning of the tune, see if you can hear the chords change as I improvise using only chord tones. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And so on and so on. Again and again and again. So I'm going to show you a little example of that. But can you hear, hopefully you can hear the chords change just from what I'm doing melodically. There's so many harmonic implications in what I'm playing melodically. So here's an example of that. take some time with this. Improvising on just chord tones is not easy, and especially if you're new to improvising in this sort of style on these type of harmonic progressions, this should take some time. It might take weeks to be able to fluently and fluidly improvise in this way. So you may find yourself struggling with rhythmically what to play. You may feel like what you're playing rhythmically is not hip, it's not stylistically accurate. So that's, before we move on with the melodic language of jazz, you should really take some time, stick with chord tones only, and work on your rhythmic sensibility with this style. So, one way to do that, the best way to do that, is listening. I'm going to give you a really good example of a tune, a specific recording to listen to for this tune. If you listen to Cannonball Adderley's album called Something Else, Miles Davis is on the record, a lot of other really, really great musicians. It's one of the great recordings of this particular tune. It's in this key. You're going to hear a lot of really cool melodic jazz language happening on this record, but really pay attention to the rhythm. And you can listen to this record literally on repeat for a while, and there's a lot of information that you can get out of just listening to this record, especially when you're just trying to focus on your rhythmic sensibility, like I said. So try to get some rhythmic information, some rhythmic ideas out of just listening to that record. So that's the number one thing, listening. Number two is start to just come up with some rhythms on your own, just kind of by vocalizing them. And perhaps this would be best done after you listen to this record, listen to some other records as well. Try to improvise just vocalizing some rhythms that are stylistically appropriate for this kind of tune, this kind of style. So if you just literally snap your fingers on 2 and 4 and just try to come up with some sort of 4-bar phrase, rhythmic phrase. 1, 2, 3, 4. Do ba do ba ba do ba ba do ba dee da da. Something like that. That was not too bad. Do ba do ba ba do ba ba do da da. I like that. And say it a few times. Boo ba do ba do da ba do da boo da da. That's mine. You can't use that one. So come up with your own. Say it several times, get comfortable with it, and then try to improvise melodically using only chord tones, using your rhythm, playing that rhythm over and over. So what I say, do ba do ba ba do da ba do da do ba da. So I'm going to play that rhythm using the chord tones from Autumn Leaves, and I'll just play the first phrase. That's not bad. Same phrase, same first 4 bars. Not too bad, right? So I'm thinking C minor 7, F7, B flat major 7. All right? Next phrase. Again, C minor. I did a little extra something there, but don't worry about that. That was not a chord tone, but that's okay. So that's a good exercise. Come up with a rhythm and try to improvise melodically, but keeping with one strict rhythm throughout. Here's another example, straight out of the repertoire, if you will. So this is a lick that I transcribed off of a Miles Davis record, his famous recording of his tune, called Four. This is another jazz standard, Four by Miles Davis. So there's some really great melodic language you can get out of studying this lick, but let's just focus on the rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ba da boo da ba do ba do ba do ba do ba da be do ba ba da do da. So those 16ths have a little bit of a swing to them. Listen to how I'm saying it. It's not straight 16ths, right? Just like the 8th notes. There's a way you have to approach the 16th notes. And you shouldn't worry too much about the notation. You should think more with your ears. Listen more than you read when you're studying this music. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ba da boo da ba do ba do ba do ba do ba da be do ba ba do da. All right. So you see, I'm not singing specific pitches, just a rhythm. But what I'm saying does have kind of a shape to it, and there's phrasing to it, right? So keep that phrasing intact when you go to use that rhythm to create melodic ideas. Ba da boo da ba do ba do ba do ba do ba da be do da da do da. So now I'm gonna take that rhythm and use it to create a solo or to improvise on the changes using only chord tones for Autumn Leaves. So here's an example of that. So the next concept we got to grasp is guide tones and guide tone lines. All right. So the guide tones for any chord are the 3rd and the 7th of the chord, and they're called guide tones because those two notes really define the quality of a particular chord. So when you think about a C major 7 chord, there's the root and the 5th, and then a minor 7 and a minor 3rd. All right. Think about a C dominant 7. It's the same root and 5th, but then a major 3rd and a minor 7. C major 7, same root and 5th, but a major 3rd, major 7. So thinking about this thing, kind of not looking at notation, is really, really helpful. Being able to just kind of conceptualize this stuff in your mind. It's very helpful when improvising in real time over a tune like this. So you should familiarize yourself with all the guide tones for all the chords throughout the entire tune. All right? So to start with the C major 7, there's the 2 guide tones. What are the guide tones for the next two? The next chord, the F7. There's those guide tones. What are the guide tones on B major 7? What are the guide tones on E flat major 7? A minor 7 flat 5, D7, G minor 7. So just the guide tones. So when you play those in some sort of logical voice leading pattern, you come up with what's called a guide tone line. Now it's worth your time to just play a guide tone line for the entire tune, just in half notes. to really familiarize yourself with what the guide tones are of each chord. And you're going to start to really hear the harmonic changes because those chords are so characteristic and defining. Those tones are so characteristic and defining of what each chord is. So here's an example of the guide tone line from Autumn Leaves. Okay, so what are we going to do with that information? We got our guide tones, comfortable with them. We can play through all the guide tones, play in real time for the whole tune. One approach to take with guide tones is to improvise using the guide tones, but also using surrounding neighbor tones. All right? So we're going to stick with a diatonic neighbor tone above and below each guide tone as a sort of springboard for some melodic development in our solo. So, starting with the first chord, the third, let's just stick with the third for now, is E flat, right? So I'm going to take a diatonic note above and below that E flat, and then play the guide tone itself, the E flat. So right there, that's a good melodic idea to start developing as part of a solo. So now that you've become familiar with the guide tones, now I want you to become familiar with the diatonic neighbor tones surrounding the guide tones. So let's just stick with the third. Now we'll stick with the third of the next chord, F7. The third is A natural. What are the diatonic neighbor tones? Just the diatonic, I mean the notes from the key of G minor. There's the diatonic note above the third, below the third, and the third itself. And then the third of B flat major 7. The third of E flat major 7. So let me just play that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Keep going. A minor 7, 5, 5. D7. That one's a little tricky because the third of D7 is an F sharp. It's outside of the key. It's a raised leading tone, right? But you can just use the diatonic notes surrounding it, which in this case are G, F, and then F sharp. It's a nice sound. And then G minor 7. So use this, and again, we're not playing a solo yet, but just as an exercise, surround each third of each chord in real time over the changes of the tune. So familiarize yourself with that. And you can vary the rhythm a little bit. Whatever it is. All right, so here's an example of that. Diatonic neighbor tones surrounding the third of each chord. Now let's take a bit more of a chromatic approach to the same idea. So we're still surrounding the third of each chord with neighbor tones, but we're going to add some more chromatic type neighbor tones when appropriate. So the first one is going to be the same. Now when we get to this F7, surrounding the A, the third of the chord, let's use chromatic notes rather than diatonic notes. You get a different color rather than when we get to the third of B flat major 7, let's use chromatic neighbor tones as well. So again, I'm thinking about the third, and I'm just surrounding that third with a chromatic note above and below. Let's stick with diatonic on E flat major 7. Now, A minor 7 flat 5. We use a chromatic note underneath as well. D7, we'll go, the third is F sharp, right? We'll go a step above and a half step below. It's a nice little sound. And then we can stick with diatonic for the G minor 7. So you can hear the chord changes still, even though I'm doing some starting to get some kind of complicated melodic ideas happening, you can still clearly hear those chord changes, hopefully. So here's an example of that. Neighbor tones with some more chromatic type approach. So now that you've explored these different ideas, some of the rhythmic ideas, getting comfortable with the chord tones, comfortable with the guide tones, now exploring diatonic and chromatic neighbor tones. You can also do the same thing, diatonic, chromatic, neighbor tones, with the seventh of each chord as well. That's another great thing to explore. Let's just try to put it all together. Once you're comfortable doing all those ideas that we kind of outlined, really as almost like an exercise, then you're ready to start really improvising using those ideas. So here's an example of just trying to take those ideas and putting them all together into a improvised solo that actually makes some musical sense and sounds nice. All right, hope this helps everyone. Thanks a lot.